Hello, I'm Lucas Kanga, and today we're going to talk about the topic of the human connectome. This name, which might sound a bit new, has to do with connection. And we're going to say that you are your connectome. The person you are being right now is that way because you have different areas and systems of your brain connected in a particular way. And it's easy to understand that when you're born, you come into the world with a certain percentage already connected, obviously, because many characteristics of what we later call personality are congenital. They come with your genes. They are, in part, traits that our ancestors already had. But there's another connectome, which is the other 50%. While there's not much we can do about the first 50%, where does the other 50% develop? In the environment plus the situation. What does environment mean? Well, environment refers to chronic, long-term situations. For example, living in a particular country, studying a certain degree, belonging to a particular religion or group. An environment plus situation is also made up of more acute situations. For example, working with someone, having a partner. All those stimuli have contributed to forming this connectome. They have provided you with connections that are more or less connected depending on the experiences you've had. When we talk about a brain that has a connectome, we all have one. One could say and understand why I am either more rational or more emotional. Or, for example, why I make some decisions more emotionally than rationally. Or, for instance, why I am more intuitive or need much more data. Or I prefer much more controlled environments or less controlled ones. Or perhaps being more extroverted or introverted. All those traits that we later see as personality, where do they come from? Why are they there? Why is it easier for me to have one trait and a bit more difficult to have another? We are going to call that a paradox. Our brain works in a paradoxical way. This means that our connectome, although it is fairly well defined, which is to say we are more connected to certain areas than to others, based on our experience, environment, and situation. The paradox is that we possess both characteristics at the same time, to a certain degree. For example, one paradox is being extroverted or introverted. In this case, I could say that I am extroverted, but in reality, I am being extroverted to a certain extent and at the same time introverted to another extent. The term paradox is completely different from opposite. It is not the opposite, it is not inaccessible. We have both characteristics at the same time. Understanding the concept of paradox will help us understand the concept of flexibility. What is flexibility? The characteristics we have as part of our personality, which are based on our connectome, the way our systems are wired, allow us to relate to others and be flexible with our environment. Sometimes I will need to be extroverted, sometimes introverted, but there will also be times when I have to make decisions based on information and do so rationally, and sometimes not because I don't have that information. So I will have to rely on intuition. This concept brings together flexibility and paradox. This is how the brain protects itself and becomes increasingly diverse in order to understand most of the world, most of reality. Just imagine if we lost the ability to be flexible or to relate paradoxically. Then we would only be able to understand either the rational or the emotional side. That would truly be a waste. The brain is meant for much more than that. When we say that you are your connectome, it doesn't mean you are a connectome, but rather that you are becoming. And this verb tense is very important. It means that the connectome can be changed. If you notice, the verb to be in its infinitive form is fixed. I am introverted. But what we're going to suggest is, I am being introverted. It's a big semantic shift, but it has to do with the fact that it can be developed. And how can a connectome be developed? Through practice. We have approximately 64,000 or 65,000 thoughts a day. How many of those are about what you prefer, what you studied, where you were born, what you know? You'll realize that most of them are related to that. So how can we get to know or connect with other connectomes? Well, through experimentation, through new experiences, with new episodes in different situations and environments. That's why we say there's a way to reconnect, which is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to develop new connections and new versions of the connectome. A version 1.0 is introverted. Another version, 2.0, could easily be a bit more extroverted. This capacity for flexibility is what makes us human and allows us to relate to our environment in a very flexible way. So in today's session, we discussed, I am my connectome, you are your connectome. And to summarize what we've covered, it's important to understand first that the connectome is modifiable. We change the environment, we change the situation. Possibly, what relates to genetics is a bit more complex and requires more work. But our connectome is being, remember that, it's a continuous present and it can be developed. By what modes? New practices, daring to try new things, changing the way we think, learning new languages and other techniques that will help us develop different types of connectomes and achieve another way of being. Above all, don't forget what the paradoxical relationship is, and the capacity our brain and also our mind have to possess characteristics simultaneously at the same time. What for? So that we can be flexible and relate to as many realities as possible, to as many scenarios as possible. That's why always remember that you are your connectome until you decide to change it. Thank you very much for taking part in this module, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions.